Good morning once again. Get that cup of coffee and let's jump right into it. It's day 4 in our journey where we're looking at waiting on God / delayed blessings. And we're going to look at the story of Moses. Now, most of us, when we think in terms of Moses, we know the basic storyline. You know, the Egyptian male children are being put to death at birth, and so Moses' mother tries to save him, put him into a little makeshift boat, sails him down the Nile. His sister's watching the entire time, and of course Pharaoh's daughter takes him out of the water, and he ends up ultimately being taken in, kind of adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, and he's raised in Egyptian royalty. Now, we don't know a lot about the chronology of the story. We know things like, well, okay, then ultimately he sees the burning bush and God calls him to go, set the Israelites free. But there's some things that happen in between there. You may know this part of the storyline. Once Moses grows up, now mind you, he's grown up as a royal Egyptian. He sees an Egyptian mistreating one of the Israelite workers. They were using the Israelites as a slave labor force. And he defends the Israelite, and in the process of defending the Israelite, he kills the Egyptian. And he buries him in the sand. Sand is easy to bury people in. He hides his bad deed. The next day, Moses goes out and he sees a couple of Israelites arguing with one another, and he tries to break them up. He says, hey, you guys are brothers. Don't fight each other. And they turn on him and they say, who made you to be judge over us? You're going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian? And Moses panics, man. He knows the word is out. And sure enough, Pharaoh has found out, and Pharaoh is ticked that he has killed an Egyptian. So he leaves, man. He leaves Egypt. He's royalty, and he runs for his life. He goes to Midian, and he takes up life there. Now here's the part that we would not know from reading the story in Exodus, which is where the original story comes from. We have to go to a New Testament book, the book of Acts, to find this particular facet out. So I'm going to start reading to you in Acts chapter 7, and in verse 23 of Acts 7, it says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian. So he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought his own people, now listen to this part, it's very important. Moses thought his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. Now this is fascinating. Where did he get this notion that God wanted to use him to rescue the people? How old was Moses? We don't know in Exodus how old he was. It tells us of the incident in killing the Egyptian. It doesn't tell us his age. Acts tells us his age. He was 40. Now, pick up the story that we're most familiar with. He sees a bush aflame in Midian. He's living in Midian now. He's run for his life. And he sees a bush aflame, but it's not being consumed. And he goes, and of course, that's where he has his first conversation with God. Now, we're never told in Exodus that when he killed that Egyptian in defending the Israelite, that he believed God wanted to use him to deliver the people of Israel. So when he now sees the burning bush, some of you know, some of you may not know, how many years have transpired? Well, the answer is 40 years. He has been waiting. Okay, he is now an 80-year-old codger. And now God says, I want you to go and do what you wanted to do when you were 40 years old. When you felt young and strapping and experienced and ready to go, I didn't feel like you were. But now you're 80 years old and have long forgotten that thought that was in your mind about redeeming and releasing and saving, rescuing the people of Israel. Now I want you to go. So contemplate this. He wanted to do the will of God. He wanted to throw himself into the work of God at age 40. We would have all said, that's the perfect time to get at it. God says no. And he lives in obscurity for 40 years. 40 years of obscurity. Surely by this time, the thought, the desire to rescue the people of God is long gone. And that's when God calls him back. Now, God gives him another 40 years. And by the way, it's fascinating. It says that when Moses finally dies at age 120, his eyes were still good and his body was still full of vigor. That's the ride I've been asking God for all these years. I want to end just as strong as I ever was. That's already a failure. That's not happening for me. But the point of this is that sometimes we have to wait beyond what makes any sense to us so that God can secretively forge some things into our character that He knows are critical. We may not even know what they are. And His means of forging these things in our character may seem so obscure. I mean, 40 years of just living as a shepherd, just kind of chasing some sheep around, and yet that was the exact lesson in humility, in patience, and endurance. Watching over entities, sheep, that constantly get in trouble and constantly need to be rescued. These were character-forming lessons that God knew that He needed before He would really be ready to do the thing that God had created Him to do. What if there's something unique, and there is something unique that God created you to do that nobody else can do, and what if He has to take you or I through some experiences that are disappointing and seem to be meaningless to us, but in fact God is forging some character in us that He knows is going to be critical once He can finally release us into that mission that He initially created us for. I hope maybe this speaks to your heart today, and I hope perhaps that someone in particular, this is the nudge of God through this story of Moses. Thank you.